Sutamon notre Dao notre Teamon Uto traya satya totayato Imato yasatao notre Teamon Uto traya satya tong sadom sadom Sadom, Sadom.
If China had acted in a timely manner in that 3-week window when something could have been done, 95% of the cases of COVID would never have happened and we would not now be in the grip of a global pandemic. That situation is what we are confronting day by day.
Can you explain further what the weaponisation of COVID means?
First of all, there was the control of the data, so that nobody else could say things about what was really going on and apportion blame in the way we've been talking about, because people simply were not confident about what we knew and did not know. It isn't just bureaucratic inefficiency, people in Wuhan scared of what their bosses in Beijing will say. This is a deliberate cover-up to maintain control, first and foremost, of what's happening inside China. We mustn't underestimate the importance of the Chinese government trying to control its own people and manage its own disasters, without, of course, the rest of the world knowing, but mostly because they're not sure of how Chinese people themselves will react. And the biggest concern at that time was what would happen if all this came out at the time of Chinese New Year. And of course, we now know that that was the worst miscalculation of all, to think you get away with allowing millions of people to travel around inside and out of China, and that would not inevitably result in what was an infection outbreak, becoming an epidemic, and then a pandemic. That was the massive error of judgment. But that error of judgment was made, I believe, in consciousness of the extent of the problem and the risks associated with it. An extraordinary state of affairs. When Chinese officials say something, that is what they are saying as the notional representatives of the Chinese people, and anybody who disagrees with that is therefore taking an anti-China position. And if you haven't got the strong enough evidence to prove it, there is this. The lie direct is an incredibly powerful political weapon used by totalitarian regimes, but the big lie is out there, and the people who are one way or the other captive by Chinese political and economic and other pressures have to toe the line. And if they don't support that kind of story, they're not members of the big China club. These kinds of stories continue, and they have been absolutely at the heart of Australia's response, Australia's efforts to establish the truth, which of course has been seen by the Chinese Communist Party as a direct attack on its authority and its nominal truthfulness. And that has resulted in the deterioration of relations and the economic blackmail that has been exercised against Australia, because the Australian Prime Minister said a WHO inquiry will not prove anything, a Chinese inquiry, it has to be independent. And that triggers a massive defensive, aggressive response on the part of China. And the same has happened to many other states who've taken a similar position.
So, forecasting, if you will, into the future, how do you expect the relationship between Australia and China to develop?
A great deal depends on the extent to which the Australian government feels able to separate what previously had been separated, the two boxes, one containing a political relationship and one containing the economic relationship. The extent to which the Chinese have weaponized this situation to increase their control over democracies, interfering in elections, interfering in elites various, interfering in parties, interfering in key national infrastructure, interfering in universities politically and as centres of excellence in research. There is no way that a healthy relationship between Australia and China can continue where essentially those aspects of the integrity of your economy are still susceptible to the kinds of risks that the Chinese have imposed upon them in recent years.
What is your view of China's positioning that they are the good guys in all of this, that the way they've managed the pandemic has been highly successful while the rest of the world has failed?
Yes, this is highly politicised, of course. It is a deliberate effort to take advantage of Western weakness at a time when democracies can be said, I'm afraid, reasonably, to have made not the best fist of all of this. It also shows how the West has failed to cooperate, whereas China has, over a massive area and with some of its partners, achieved what looks like a much more standardized approach, where you can move very rapidly and achieve very quick results in terms of test and trace. So that is undeniably a point. But this is not a medical campaign to say, listen, you must do as we do. It is a political campaign to say you are weak, your democracy doesn't serve the right purposes. Look at America, utter horror and chaos. Look at the United Kingdom, look at some parts of Europe as well. How on earth can you say that your system is better than ours when it is clearly incapable of doing anything other than making things worse? This is a very powerful political weapon, and it's being used very aggressively.
The Director of National Intelligence has declassified documents today revealing former CIA Director John Brennan briefed then-President Obama on Hillary Clinton's purported plan to smear then-candidate Trump in 2016, adding to what the National Intelligence Director has already declassified on this issue, and raising more questions tonight about how much more of this will come out before Election Day. Senior political correspondent Mike Emanuel is following the story tonight in Washington. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. These are handwritten notes from former CIA Director John Brennan, written according to a source familiar after Brennan briefed President Obama. At one point, Brennan writes, quote, approved by Hillary Clinton, a proposal from one of her foreign policy advisors to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security service. The notes say on 28 of July, in the margin, Brennan writes POTUS, but that section of the notes are redacted. Then it says any evidence of collaboration between Trump campaign and Russia. The remainder of the notes are redacted, except in the margins where it says JC, Dennis, and Susan. That could be referring to former FBI Director James Comey, former Obama Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, and former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. The CIA sent a memo to former FBI Director James Comey and Peter Strzok writing, quote, the following information is provided for the exclusive use of your Bureau for background investigative action or lead purposes as appropriate. One example the CIA includes, quote, an exchange redacted discussing U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's approval of a plan concerning U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump and Russian hackers hampering U.S. elections as a means of distracting the public from her use of a private email server. At a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee last week, Comey was pressed on what he did with information provided by the CIA.
Did you open an investigation?
I don't know what that refers to. As I said earlier, that does not ring any bells with me when I read that.
You did not receive any investigative referral of this nature?
I don't remember it. I don't remember receiving anything that's described in that letter.
Hillary Clinton's spokesman, Nick Merrill, has called the latest revelation, quote, baseless.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Friday. What a week. A lot going on in this country right now, but maybe the single biggest mystery, when you take 3 steps back, is why Democrats became so vicious after they won. So Joe Biden got the White House, his party took the Congress. You'd think they'd be thrilled, that's what they wanted. You'd think they'd be celebrating, but no, instead they started a purge. Within hours, Democrats began crushing even the mildest dissent. They shut down an entire social media company called Parler, not because Parler had done anything wrong, but simply because they couldn't control it. They couldn't take the chance that somebody on Parler might criticize them, so they eliminated it. Then 2 days ago, they arrested a man, threw him in handcuffs, brought him up on federal charges because he made fun of Hillary Clinton on Twitter. That man is now facing 10 years in prison. Democrats then declared war on their rival political party. Not, by the way, a metaphorical war, but an actual one with soldiers and paramilitary law enforcement and the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. They denounced Republicans, even fairly moderate establishment figures who pose really no conceivable threat to anyone. They denounced them as dangerous terrorists. They likened them to ISIS and al-Qaeda. And anyone who complained about this or fought back in any way was threatened with expulsion from Congress. In other words, it doesn't matter what voters decided in November. In the name of democracy, you can no longer serve in the Congress. That's what they said. Nor are dissidents permitted in the federal bureaucracy. No one who disagrees with our beliefs, Democrats have announced, can work in the U.S. government. We're not overstating it. That all actually happened. You saw it. Nothing like that has ever taken place in this country before. This is the most sweeping and audacious assault on civil liberties in American history. So the question is, What accounts for this? Why are they doing it? It's worth figuring that out. On the most basic level, of course, it's a power grab. We've said that from the first day, and it remains true. The Democratic Party doesn't exist to serve some abstract principle, liberty or justice or the Bill of Rights. No. Nor is its primary goal improving the lives of its voters. If you've been to Detroit, you know that's true. No, the Democratic Party exists to accumulate power, all of it. Some is never enough. The impulse is to control everything. So that's what they're trying to do now amidst the chaos and tumult. But that's not all that's going on right now. There's more. Look around. Watch as Democrats erect a permanent steel prison fence around the United States Capitol. Why is that fence there? Well, to protect the people inside, to keep the public out of what we used to call the people's house. That's happening tonight as we speak. Then notice the thousands of armed soldiers and law enforcement agents stationed outside that fence. What's their purpose? Again, protecting the people inside. Then ask yourself, why are House Democrats planning to use federal committee funds to pay for more personal security for themselves? Why the renewed push to seize firearms from law-abiding Americans who've committed no crime? Why does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seem on the verge of tears as she describes how she was almost murdered on January 6th at the Capitol? She's not entirely putting it on. She seems to mean it. If you're sensing a theme here, there is in fact a theme, and the theme is panic, fear, and it's real. You are looking at leaders who are genuinely afraid of the people they're supposed to be leading. Here's the really interesting thing. They seem much more afraid now that Donald Trump has left office. With Donald Trump gone, they sense that a period of actual populism has begun, real populism, and they may be right. Look at what happened this week on Wall Street. A group of guys on Reddit trading stocks in their boxer shorts exposed the entire American finance establishment. That's a pivotal moment in this country. Once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. Once someone pulls the mask from your face, he still remembers your face. People's attitudes about our economy will change forever because of what happened this week. It's a big deal. The Biden administration's response to what happened this week, their first impulse was to brag about having the first female Treasury Secretary. That's what they said. That's not an adequate response to what happened, and even the Biden people know that it's not. But that's all they had. The truth is, our leaders don't have answers. They don't even have explanations for what's going on. Worse than that, they themselves are deeply implicated in the systemic problems, in some cases the crimes that are dragging the country down. They know all this. They know their guilt. Here's the thing. They know that you know it too. And that's why they're afraid. They know why populism is rising, and it is. So this really is the time to make a decision about how to respond to it. What our leaders do next will define what America looks like going forward. It wouldn't even be hard to begin the process of fixing things, of bringing actual unity to a country that badly needs unity. In a democracy, the first step to unifying the country is always the same. Leaders enter into a power-sharing agreement with the people they lead. They do the obvious things. They stop lying to their own citizens. They stop attacking them, and they respect their culture. They don't try to control people's beliefs. That's not their role. They treat their own citizens like adults, meaning they treat them fairly. And above all, they cut the public in on some of the fruits of the country's success. If all the benefits of our economy seem to be accruing to a small number of people, that's a problem, and they try hard to fix it. Wise leaders know that unequal countries are volatile countries. They know that caste systems are not compatible with democracies. But our leaders don't seem to know any of that. Instead, they tell us that solar cars and mandatory diversity training are the real solutions to our problems. But no one buys that. Those are not real solutions. They're a smokescreen. They're a diversion tactic. Populism starts when people start to figure that out, and they have. And that's why everything suddenly feels so unstable right now, because once again, real populism.
Also about Joe Biden and about how things are playing out in the United States. And look, I understand lots of people say, hey, enough American politics, we did it all last year. I'll keep it short. But I'm going to tell you what's happening in the biggest country in the Western world. We kind of need to know. Remember, one of the hits that Donald Trump unsuccessfully tried to put on Joe Biden was that he was going to basically be the front man for radical socialism, that he was the acceptable face of an unacceptable political agenda, something that Joe Biden was successfully able to pretend he wasn't going to do.
Do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really?
But remember, to get anything done in the parliament, you need all 50 Democrat senators plus Kamala Harris to get anything done to pass a law, which means super lefty kooks like Bernie Sanders, well, their vote now matters, because just like Mitt Romney for the Republicans, he too can be a swing vote to decide whether things are lefty enough. And he's openly saying, get ready for radical socialism, because that's the only thing I'll vote for.
We're going to push Joe as the president as far as we can.
And as you know, Joe Biden is all about unity.
Unity. Unity. Uniting our people. Uniting our nation. Uniting to fight the foes we face with unity. Speaking of unity, the way of unity and unity.
So what does unity look like to Bernie Sanders? Well, this. He says that, well, there's no middle ground in negotiating with Republicans. So it's our way or the highway. That's apparently the unity of Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders' America. But as for the Biden Booster Network, the mainstream media in the United States, do they care about the lurch to the left? No, because they've got decorating to talk about.
Biden replaced the portrait of Andrew Jackson that President Trump had displayed. He replaced it with a picture of Benjamin Franklin, giving the boot to one of America's most controversial presidents in favor of one of the founding fathers who made huge contributions to science. No coincidence that he figures prominently along with a display of moon rocks as this White House promises to bring truth and science back to the White House.
Be a long 4 years.
Welcome. If you've read the espionage novels of John le Carré, you know that no other writer today has so brilliantly evoked the subterranean workings of government, perhaps because he himself was once a British spy. Le Carré has a name for that invisible labyrinth of power. He calls it the deep state. And now, an American you're about to meet in this broadcast has seized on that concept to describe the forces he says are controlling our government, no matter the party in power. But Mike Lofgren's no intelligence agent, although he had a top-secret security clearance. He's a numbers man, a congressional staff member for 28 years with the powerful House and Senate budget committees. Over the years, as he crunched those numbers, he realized they didn't add up. Instead, they led him to America's own deep state, where elected and unelected figures collude to protect and serve powerful vested interests. Mike Lofgren was so disgusted, he not only left Capitol Hill, he left the Republican Party and wrote this book, The Party is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. Now, at our request and exclusively for BillMoyers.com, he has written Anatomy of the Deep State. You'll want to read it as soon as we finish this conversation. Mike Lofgren, welcome.
Good to be here again, Bill.
This is a difficult subject to talk about. It would be easier if it were a conspiracy you're describing, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This is not some cabal that was hatched in the dark of night. This is something that hides in plain sight. It's something we know about, but we can't connect the dots, or most people don't connect the dots. It's kind of a natural evolution when so much money and political control is at stake in the most powerful country in the world. This has evolved over time.
And you call it the real power in the country.
Correct. It is a hybrid of corporate America and the national security state. Everyone knows what the military-industrial complex is, since Eisenhower talked about it in his farewell address.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Everyone knows Wall Street and its depredations. Everyone knows how corporate America acts. They're both about the same thing. They're both about money, sucking as much money out of the country as they can, and they're about control. corporate control and political control.
You said this, in your judgment, is the big story of our time.
It is the big story of our time. It is, I would say, the red thread that runs through the history of the last 3 decades. It's how we had deregulation, financialization of the economy, the Wall Street bust, the erosion of our civil liberties, and perpetual war.
You write that the secret and unaccountable deep state floats freely above the gridlock between both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue is the paradox of American government in the 21st century.
Well, that's just the thing. The common narrative of the last 5 years, and on a superficial level it's right, is that government is broken, it's dysfunctional, it's gridlocked. Well, that's true, and that is the visible government, the constitutional government we learn about in Civics 101, and it is gridlocked. But somehow Obama can go into Libya, he can assassinate U.S. citizens, he can collect all our phone records without a by your leave from anyone. He can even bring down a jet carrying a president of a sovereign country without asking anyone's permission, and no one seems to connect the two. The failure of our visible constitutional state and this other government that operates according to no constitutional rules or any constraint by the governed.
You go on to say, though, that it's not just the executive branch that is the heart of this, that it's just one of the several constituencies that make up what you call the deep state.
Well, it's all the national security functions of the government. It's the Pentagon, it's Homeland Security, it's the State Department. It's also Treasury, because they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with Wall Street.
For one thing, they control the flow of money.
Absolutely. And that's why there's such a flow not only of money but of personnel between Wall Street and the Treasury Department. There's other aspects of government. There's a portion of the judiciary, a small portion of the judiciary, the so-called foreign intelligence surveillance courts. Most of Congress doesn't even know how they operate.
Talk a little bit more about the nexus, the connection between the national security state and Wall Street, because this is a theme that runs through your essay.
Do you know that about 30 blocks north of here, there is a restaurant that will sell you a truffle for $95,000? Also in New York, Christie's sold at auction a painting by Francis Bacon for $142 million. Now, a parallel situation with the national security state, the NSA spent $1.7 billion to build a facility in Utah that will collect 1 yottabyte of information. That's as much information as has ever been written in the history of the world. It costs $400 by the time the Pentagon finishes paying contractors to haul 1 gallon of gasoline into Afghanistan. That's a real extravagant amount of money. In both cases of the national security state and the corporate state, they are sucking money out of the economy as our infrastructure collapses. We have a tinker toy power grid that goes out every time there's inclement weather. Tens of millions of people are on food stamps. We incarcerate more people than China, an authoritarian state with 4 times our population. Does anyone see the disparity between this extravagance for the deep state and the penury that is being forced on the rest of the country? That isn't a natural evolution. Something made it happen. We're having a situation where the deep state is essentially out of control, it's unconstrained. Since 9/11, we have built the equivalent of 3 Pentagons around the D.C. metropolitan area holding defense contractors, intelligence contractors, and government civilians involved in the military-industrial complex. There are over 400,000 contractors, private citizens, who have top secret security clearances.
And they are heart and soul of the deep state, as you describe it.
Absolutely.
They're being privatized, which means the power shifts from accountable officials to unaccountable contractors.
About 70% of the intelligence budget goes to contracts.
How new is this? I mean, back in 2010, the Washington Post published a stunning investigation of what the editors called Top Secret America. I mean, we have known about this, have we not?
Yes, we know about this, but the intelligence functions of the government are too important to outsource in the manner we have. It's something where absolute discretion is needed and absolute trust that they are not violating civil liberties. And to put this kind of a burden, if you will, on private contract employees is, I think, become a great disservice.
You say that you came to question this. It took you a while. It was a gradual enlightenment that took place. You were dealing with big numbers and particular details in the budgets that all of these agencies were sending to you when you were on Capitol Hill, right? You were seeing the numbers.
Absolutely.
What was happening to the numbers?
At the end of 2001 is we appropriated a lot of money, and it didn't seem to be going to Afghanistan, the proximate source of the 9/11 attacks. It seemed to be going to the Persian Gulf region, and I said, what's going on here? Saddam Hussein didn't bring down the Twin Towers. So the little light went on, and I began to sort of disenchant myself from the normal groupthink that tends to take over in any organization.
Groupthink. At some point in your essay, you talk about how groupthink drives the deep state.
It absolutely does, just as it tends to drive any bureaucratic organization.
What do you mean by groupthink?
Well, the psychologist Irving Janis called it groupthink. It's a kind of assimilation of the views of your superiors and your peers. It's becoming a yes man. And in many respects, it's an unconscious thing.
I remember what Upton Sinclair once said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it.
That is certainly a part of it.
You describe Washington as clearly and obviously the headquarters of the deep state, but talk about some of the others who are in the game.
Wall Street is perhaps the ultimate backstop to the whole operation because they generate so much money that they can provide second careers for a lot of the government operatives. They're going to make more money than they ever dreamed they would on Wall Street. And I think a good example of that is the most celebrated soldier of the last decade, David Petraeus. What did he do when he retired? He went to Colbert Kravis Roberts, a Wall Street buyout firm with $90 billion in assets under management.
You describe him as a kind of avatar of the deep state.
He is, in a way, because he now represents both ends of it. We see now our present-day Cincinnatus did not pick up the plow when he laid down the sword.
Cincinnatus was the Roman who left his farm to become a general in the war, and when the war was over, he went back to be a farmer. That doesn't happen today.
No, it doesn't. The vast majority of generals seem to end up on the boards of defense contractors.
Talk a little bit about what you call this strange relationship between Silicon Valley and the government, and how it fits into the deep state.
Well, the National Security Agency could not do what it does. The CIA could not do what it does without Silicon Valley. Now, Silicon Valley, unlike the defense contractors, mostly sells to private individuals and to companies. It's not a big government vendor. However, its services are necessary, and de facto, they have become a part of the NSA's operations. I'm sure the CEOs of some of these companies try to obscure the fact that this has mostly been voluntary for many years.
You mean the surveillance?
The surveillance.
The gathering of information on unknowing citizens.
Absolutely.
For commercial purposes, though.
Precisely. They've done it themselves, and they've assisted the NSA through a FISA court order.
Foreign
Intelligence Surveillance Act. So this has been going on for quite a while, yet now, like Inspector Raynaud, they are shocked to find out. But I think their main shock is that they're now starting to lose market share in foreign countries.
These moguls, as you call them, pass themselves off as libertarians.
They do. They make a big pretense about being libertarians and believing in the rugged individualism and so forth. But they've been every bit as intrusive as the NSA has been in terms of collecting your data for commercial purposes rather than so-called national security purposes, but they're in it just as heavily as the NSA is. And they somehow managed to get the intellectual property laws rigged so that you are theoretically subject to a fine of up to $500,000 for jailbreaking your phone.
Which means?
Which means if you don't like the carrier on your phone that the manufacturer dictates you shall have, and you change it without authorization, you don't have the right to something you bought.
Could this symbiotic and actual relationship between Silicon Valley and the government, reflecting the deep state, explain the indulgence Washington has shown Silicon Valley on matters of intellectual property?
Absolutely. People no longer necessarily own their property that they buy if they're buying it from Silicon Valley. They simply have a kind of lease on it.
If, as you write, the ideology of the deep state is not Democrat or Republican, not left or right, what is it?
It's an ideology. I just don't think we've named it. It's a kind of corporatism. Now, the actors in this drama tend to steer clear of social issues. They pretend to be merely neutral servants of the state, giving the best advice possible on national security or financial matters. But they hold a very deep ideology of the Washington consensus at home, which is deregulation, outsourcing, deindustrialization and financialization, and they believe in American exceptionalism abroad, which is boots on the ground everywhere. It's our right to meddle everywhere in the world, and the result of that is perpetual war.
Joe Biden's announcement of Kamala Harris as VP, well, it contained a telling tidbit. This is what he said in the written statement. I've decided that Kamala Harris is the best person to help me take this fight to Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and then to lead this nation starting in January 2021. Wait, to lead this nation? Wait, wasn't that you supposed to be on the top of the ticket doing all that leading for us, Joe? You know, that whole presidency thing? Come on, man. Even Joe's with it enough to understand that he's not really going to be running the show if he wins in November.
It has to be demonstrated that whomever I pick is two things. One, is capable of immediately being president, because I'm an old guy, okay? No, but I'm serious.
Well, Now that we know who will really be taking the reins in a Biden administration, let's take a look at what she'll do if they're elected. Today, the New York Times went the absurd route of touting the senator as a, quote, moderate. Of course, the opposite is the case. For starters, her position on illegal border crossings.
I believe if someone crosses over the border, it's illegally, it is illegal, and you would decriminalize it.
I would not make it a crime punishable by jail.
Of course not. Come on in, bienvenidos. And what about taxpayer-funded health care for all those new undocumented Democrats?
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Don't you love the hand-raised questions? I love those. What about abortion?
I'm going to put in place and require that states that have a history of passing legislation that is designed to prevent or limit a woman's access to reproductive health care, that those laws have to come before my Department of Justice for a review.
That's called pre-clearance. That means partial birth abortion, greenlit under President Harris. And she loves socialized medicine.
Do you think eliminating private insurance would be a socialist idea?
No. Okay. So I strongly believe that we need to have Medicare for all.
Do you think that's socialist or not, Medicare for all?
No. It's about providing health care to all people.
Yeah, it's worked out well for California, everything they're trying out there. And did I mention that Kamala also wants to take your guns away?
Upon being elected, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to get their act together and have the courage to pass reasonable gun safety laws. And if they fail to do it, then I will take executive action.
Yeah, reasonable gun safety, a little commaology needed there. Here come the guns. The Times also, by the way, called her pragmatic. We say that's fraudulent. Tulsi Gabbard exposed Kamala as a phony on criminal justice.
Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president. She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor.
The people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Tulsi Gabbard just took her apart. Do you remember that debate? Now, furthermore, Senator Harris basically accused Joe Biden of being a racist on national TV.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race. You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
That was the it moment. Well, after that, she very publicly suggested that Biden was guilty of sexually assaulting Tara Reade.
Somebody who has a relationship with Vice President Biden, what message would you give to the women who feel like their space has been invaded in the past by the Vice President?
I believe them, and I respect them being able to tell their story and having the courage to do it.
Do you believe that the Vice President should enter this race?
He's going to have to make that decision for himself.
Marinate in all of that for a moment, okay? Essentially racist, at least in promoting all these past senators like Robert Byrd, friendship, so forth. And implicitly, at the very least implicit, she was saying he was guilty of sexual assault, but now all of a sudden she's willing to work with him? A segregationist and a sex criminal? Well, it's a good question. Maybe somebody in the lamestream media will have the courage to ask about this. But given all these issues, I've no doubt that the Biden campaign looked far and wide for a better option than Harris, but I guess there wasn't. There wasn't anyone. Susan Rice had way too much baggage and no election experience. Former Obama advisor David Axelrod said tonight Biden actually clicked best with Governor Whitmer. But she's not a woman of color and runs Michigan like a tin pot dictatorship. And the other candidates were political small fries without any type of experience or name recognition that you'd want in a VP. Of course, Biden's big mistake, of course, was narrowing his options by limiting his choice on the basis of skin color. And on planet Earth, that used to be called bias or even racism. Using color as a metric? Well, that's what he decided to do. And as someone running for the nation's highest office, Biden is morally obligated to pick the best person to take his place in the event of a tragedy, regardless of race or gender, of ethnicity, any of it. But he never even tried to do that. How cynical. Instead, he viewed the whole thing as a box-checking exercise for the woke crowd. He should have made his choice just on merit. But now he's stuck with Harris. The bottom line? She ran for president not so long ago and had a golden opportunity to present herself to liberal voters in the Democrat Party. But they rejected her in the most comprehensive manner possible, making it absolutely clear that they didn't regard her as worthy of serving as president. Now, in a desperate effort to please the hard left, Biden has rejected the judgment of his own party's voters and placed Harris in line to have all the power that Democrats thought she shouldn't have.
And just state your name and your clan name.
Joa Guishon Jasta. Anadaga Heno. I'm Oren Lyons, that's my English name. Joa Guishon is my clan name. The Wolf is my clan. Onondaga is my nation. The Haudenosaunee is the Confederacy. And the Confederacy is better known as the Iroquois. We're old people. Been here a long time.
So the first question, from your vantage point and from your people's vantage point, what is creation?
Well, that's huge. It's huge like creation. Creation is the universe. Creation is everything that we can see and probably a whole lot that we can't. Probably more that we can't see. But it's what's about us, and it's the relationship, this amazing web of life that we have here. And nature, which is part of creation, is more like the earth itself in its position in this whole web of life in the creation. We have relationships with all the elements and forces of life, including the sun, we call our elder brother. The moon, we call our grandmother. The winds, we call our grandfathers. The four directions, our grandfathers. And then all of the elements of life itself. So in this idea of creation, nature is the earth itself, and we call the earth Mother. Itinoha, our mother. As we call all women Itinoha, mothers. And from mothers spring life, and we understand that. And we know that life springs from the earth, that generations that are looking up layer upon layer, waiting their time to come up and serve and be, is our responsibility. So the earth is female.
How are, the earth is the mother, and so how are humans described? What kind of agents are?
And then if you have a mother, then you have children. So we're children. We're children of the earth. And we're tied to the earth. We come from the earth and we go back to the earth, and the earth has great systems of regeneration, great cycles of regenerative life. And it's these cycles that we're all part of. Just as the earth has seasons of life, all animals and all things that grow and fly, and including humans, have seasons of life as well. And so we grow in the same style. What's different about all of that is the time that's allocated to the varieties of life that are on the earth. And we have a fairly long system of life, but not the longest. Turtles live beyond us. Parrots live beyond us. There are certain mammals that have an older life cycle than we do, but we have a long life cycle as it is on Earth. And then also, when you move down to the fine insects, then their life cycle is counted in days. So what you have is this variety and complexity of life, and the times that are allocated, and what happens during those times for each of these elements. That's what's important to understand.
In the understanding of the earth, what are your recommendations for how we should how humans treat the world and the planet and our resources? What is the disposition that we need to take, humans, toward the gifts that the planet provides us?
Well, what I've noticed and know about indigenous people around the earth is that many, many indigenous nations have been able to hang on to the knowledges that they have, the traditional knowledge. Fortunately, I think, for everybody. And in this traditional knowledge is the directions or the instructions for a good life. So we have instructions about how do we conduct ourselves on this earth, and probably the first one is respect. And I think if there was a law, common law around the world, indigenous peoples, and I think everybody, respect is a law. And if people followed this law, simple law of respect, you'd have a lot more peace, and you'd have a lot more quiet and a better life. So I'd say respect, conduct yourself accordingly, and recognize what your obligations are and what your duties are. And the duties are to protect these life forms. When the peacemaker came to our territory about 1,000 years ago and brought this whole concept of peace as the original 5 nations, the Mohawks, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Cayugas, Senecas, were in a constant warfare. And we had really forgotten our instructions that we had prior to that, and we're not living by them. And the peacemaker came among us and brought this whole idea, concept of peace and democracy. And he gave it to us whole. And it took him a long time to do that. There's a whole story about how he came and how he worked with Hayan Wentha, whom you call Hiawatha, and how they worked and brought together this great confederacy called the Haudenosaunee, based on peace, based on equity, justice for people, and based on the power of the good minds, the power of unity, the issues of health, all given to us 1,000 years ago. And he laid out the process by which we do this. And one of the first things he said was, he was going to give great responsibility to the women. Since the earth is female, then the women should be working with the earth. Men would be in charge of fire. Women would be in charge of water. And so the men are work to see to the welfare. We do counseling, we do meetings, we do all of that. And if needs be, we fight. But basically, we're dedicated to peace. And that was what's so important about that time, 1,000 years ago. When if you looked in Europe at that time, as great wars were going on, and the whole history of Europe, as I saw it, is one war after the other, century after century, how people lived in constant fear, and thousands of people died. Well, in this part of the universe, which was kind of just isolated, Western Hemisphere wasn't even known about, we were operating under a different system. And it was basically one of respect and councils of leaders to try to keep the peace, because human nature is human nature. And you have to have a process by which to meet problems. And you have to have rules and so forth. So the rules was always based around respect. And fundamental to all of that was the understanding of how the earth itself was paramount to all of our life. And so in this idea of respect was also the understanding of what we should do and how we should conduct ourselves according to the elements of the earth and all of the natural worlds. So we always said that we have been told and understand that we're relatives. And where our white brother will talk about water and trees and animals and fish as resources, we talk about them as relatives. And that's a whole different perspective. If you think that they're relatives and you understand it and you understand that, then you're going to treat them differently. And the responsibility the peacemaker said to us was very clear. He planted a great tree of peace, a great white pine, a great symbol to our nations. He said, this is the great tree of peace. He said, its roots will be 4 white roots of truth that reach in the 4 directions of the earth. And those that have nowhere to go can follow the root back to its source and come under the protection of the great tree. And he says, on top of this tree I place the eagle, and the eagle who will watch everything and watch and guard the security of this tree and will let us know when problems are coming. And he said that this tree of peace is a spiritual law. It represents a spiritual law. And the spiritual law is the law of nature. And he told us explicitly, never challenge this law, because you cannot prevail. You will not prevail. Wrap your laws, your rules, and your conduct. He said, you, the leaders, when you're weak as a human being, he said, this tree will give you your spine strength. Wrap yourself around this tree because it's powerful. Do not challenge the laws of nature because you cannot, you will not prevail. Now that's great wisdom. That's 1,000 years ago. And it reminded us of our obligations. And so Indian nations in North America, South America, Central America, as far as I know, indigenous people around the world all have ceremonies. And these ceremonies are thanksgivings for what we have. We have just now initiated a great ceremony for the trees at Onondaga, and the longhouses of the Six Nations, still operational. And we hold these ceremonies for the leader of the trees, which is the maple. The maple is the leader. And so we have a ceremony of thanksgiving as soon as the sap starts running. And then when the sap stops, then we'll have a closure ceremony. But in between, we're thankful for all trees of this earth, wherever they are, whatever their names are, those that we know and those that we don't. We give thanks. And so if this kind of instruction were given and understood by other people, and you wouldn't be cutting trees all over the world and destroying the infrastructure of life and everything that's in the woods. We had a profound agreement when we first initiated the 5 nations, later become the 6 nations with the Tuscarora Nation, came in 1713, 1722, became the 6th nation, but we all agreed. We all agreed that we would work together and be together. And so we had a treaty amongst ourselves, and it was called simply one dish, one spoon. That's a concept of sharing, and this world has to understand the importance of sharing. I know that in the structure of the United States, it's very contrary to that. People are not instructed to share. They're instructed to gain. They're instructed to hold to themselves. They're instructed to gather unto themselves. And they're rewarded for that. And so you have an instruction that's contrary, very contrary to this whole concept, if indeed this is what you think is right. But this, I'm simply telling you what our instructions are. And so operating under this, I've traveled to Indian nations across North America and Central America. And I always am invited to the ceremonies, and I know what's going on. I may not understand the language, and the dances may be different, but I know what is being said. It's always the same. Thanksgiving to the creation. Thanksgiving to the life-giving forces of the earth. And when the Christians came here, they made life hard for us. They brought a whole different thought and idea. And we're still suffering from that. But we can get into that on a later time. But in relation to all of this, and you're talking about conduct, conduct is quite simple. Respect for life. And understanding that life is our relatives, and how goes it with them, goes it with us. And so we've taken this to a high degree. I'm the chief, one of the chiefs in the Council of Chiefs at Onondaga, and I sit on behalf of the Turtle Clan, even though I myself am a wolf. And I've been there since 1967. I have a lot of experience with different administrations, with different events in this country, and I've watched a lot of changes. And I see that we're not doing very well, that we seem to be moving farther and farther away from what would be good for our grandchildren and their children. And so I think that the instructions for people is be respectful for life, appreciate what you have, share what you have, and make up your own mind about things. It's very difficult to deal with a whole nation that's instructed to be greedy. How do you deal with that? To be mindful of yourself and your own doings and to secure everything for yourself and to become, as they pointed out a few days ago, one of the billionaires of the world. They promote that, and they say that's great, and they say this is what you should be striving for. But we look at it differently. That amount of wealth in this time in life in Earth is a lot of influence. And a handful of people with that amount of influence and that kind of a direction in life is not going to take you in the right direction. I mean, they piecemeal stuff, and they can't say that they're bad people, but we don't say that at all. We just say that their instructions seem to be directed in the wrong way. And interesting, to us being an American Indian, and familiar with the processes of foundations and people trying to get money for this and that, and poor Indians and so forth. First of all, today, in all of the United States, we're less than 1% of the population of the country. And support for Indian causes from the foundation world is 0.06%, not even 1% going to Indians. Why is that? You know, it's an interesting question. Why is it that they don't want us to survive, that they don't see it's important, and that maybe we're more of a problem? I mean, the whole process of the United States history has been to assimilate us, and of course it's a question of land. So we've been fighting this whole issue of land claims. You know, in 1492, we owned all of North America and owned it in the broad sense in that it was in our caretaking, and no one owns the land. It always belongs to your children and your grandchildren. So we were protecting it in their interest. Well, a whole different thought came here. And when they first said they wanted to buy land, our leaders laughed and they said, "How can you buy land?" They said, "That's like buying water or buying air. You can't buy land. Land belongs to everybody." But certainly not. And today we can see, yes, they do buy land. You can fly over America and you can see all the squares. But all this land is bought. But the land that you bought, you don't carry the responsibility that goes with the land. It's a personal gathering. And so the consequence of that is it's deteriorating. And so I don't know what the answer is to all of this, except that under the leadership of this country right now, we're going downhill fast. And I think that this present administration, Mr. Bush, is acting in a criminal manner in not telling the children or protecting the children and grandchildren's interests. He's not protecting their interests. And that's really criminal. I mean, that's going against our instruction entirely. He's not protecting life. He's promoting the interests of business. And their interest is profit. So we're in a problem, and the consequence of which we look at. The present state of the world is very serious in terms of its health and how the health relates to us. I think we have to understand something here, and that is that the earth can deteriorate and ultimately lose its life-giving forces, and it can change and become barren, or it can change and become snow. It has its own direction. It has its own will and ability. And we're part of that. And so right now I see two big areas of concern. Some time back, when Einstein was asked a question about what is the most powerful law of the universe, he said it was the law of compound. And I pondered that, and I said, compound, what does that actually mean? And I really thought about it and have been thinking about it lately, and I come to the conclusion that it's kind of like an explosion in reverse. It starts slow and ends fast, where an explosion starts fast and ends slow. So compound are in two that I see, and one is a compound of the ice melting, and the other is a compound of human population. Both are moving and accelerating. Both are under their own direction. It doesn't seem like there's a control factor here for either one. Certainly the ice melt is something beyond our control at the moment, because what it takes the instruction of the peacemaker to be of one mind. He said, when you're of one mind, the power of the good mind can change anything. And so we have to somehow get to that point of unity of thought and direction and effort. And if we can do that, we certainly can mitigate what's going on now. You know, when we're concerned is for the children and their grandchildren and their children. Peacemaker said, you know, that we're responsible and that we should be always watching. And so I think what he's saying and the instruction is correct and could happen. America is isolated from the world, both in thought and conduct, size, oceans. And in that isolation, you know, it's heavily involved in what's going on inside America. Like, for instance, you know, and I'm part of that too, because this weekend, Syracuse University just won the Big East title. Well, I'm an alumni of Syracuse, and so I enjoyed that. But this whole country is fixed on the idea of sports. It's fixed on the idea of distractions and human titillation, if you will, or whatever it may be. And they're not looking at the large pictures. And they've become insulated against the realities of the world. Even our poor people in the U.S. would be wealthy in any other part of the world. I mean, poor people in America have television sets. That's not the way it is in the rest of the world. And we're just maybe 1/5 of the population of the whole world, and yet we're using 1/4 of all the resources. I know Vice President Cheney said, well, if we're creating 1/4 of the energy of the world, then it's just right for us to use 1/4 of the resources. Well, that kind of thinking is very destructive. So I think we have to adjust and be alert and aware. We have to get a message to the people, and they have to understand the seriousness of this situation right now, this compounding of human population. You know, Lester Brown, who's recognized as one of the great scientists of the world concerning environment and interests, said that in 1950 there was 2.5 billion people in the world. 2000, there were 6 billion. So in that short time, we almost doubled, tripled the population of the world. That's not sustainable. That is not sustainable. You can't do that. But we are. You know, and that's a reality. Who knows that? Who thinks about that? I heard Ted Turner say that one time. He says, well, in my lifetime, I've seen this population double. And you think about that. You know, it took 4 million years to get to that point. It takes something like 50 years to do it twice. No, that don't work. And so that's what we're facing in the world today. We have China, who has 1 billion people, more, 1.3, I think, maybe probably more by this time. India, which has 1 billion people, just the two of them are 1/3 of the population of the world. And they're busy.
Yeah, we started out with that. You talked about the destroying of nature. And just what have your council said about the state of the world? Has this been predicted? What were the signs? And have the signs occurred? Have things come to pass that you've been predicting?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, that Indian nations have what they call prophecies. But also the Bible has prophecies. And people have had prophecies all the time. It seems to be part of human nature. And these prophecies currently we're working on organizing them. And as I studied them, I come to the conclusion they're not so much prophecies as they are instructions of conduct. And the prophecies being that this will happen if you don't do this, or this will happen if you drop this. So it always leaves the option to the present. It always leaves the option to the current generation. And I think that that's the importance of these prophecies. Now, we've had three major events for the Haudenosaunee. One was the first time when we were given the instructions of how to live, which some people would call religion or ceremonies. And that was long ago. We're not sure exactly when, but we do know the process, and we knew what happened, how it happened. That was very, very, very long ago. And then somehow we got lost, personally. I mean, the five nations, and began this fighting. And then we had the second instruction or support, and that was the coming of the peacemaker, spiritual being, who gave us this great idea of democracy and organized our thoughts in that direction. And I mentioned earlier that he gave this responsibility of raising the leaders to the women. He also instructed us on the importance of clans. So I think this relationship is important. People should understand the relationship between us and the natural world. And we love that so much that we have taken on the symbol of our relatives. And so, as you see, I'm wearing the symbol of the turtle. Well, the turtle also represents North America, the Great Turtle Island. And it's a symbol of longevity and of strength. And so we have a turtle clan. And yet I told you I'm a wolf. So we have a relative of a wolf, and the deer, and the bear, and the eel, and the hawk, and the beaver, snipe, all of these. And the different nations have different clans sometimes. I'm just astonished by the amount of clans that the Hopis have and the amount of clans that the Navajos have. They have a Wind clan. They have just about whatever you could think of. There's a clan, but it's all related to nature. And so that's how we see ourselves. And a wolf is a wolf is a wolf. And so I'm always mindful of what's happening to my four-footed brother. And we were instructed to watch that and to see, because they said whatever happens to him is going to happen to you. And so how we treat these animals who are doing what they do in kind of a they live in a state of grace. They don't do anything wrong. They just do what they do, and they do their best to do it, in spite of everything and everything. They continue. So in New York City, as we sit here, pretty quick now, there's going to be hawks flying through here. And certainly the geese are flying. And this is an old flyway right here. They used to stop here all the time. They still fly. They still go by here because it's an old rule, an old law. It goes on. It's just that you don't see them. But they are doing their best to continue. And so it's like that around everywhere. And we have to understand this relationship. And so we have that. And it brings us closer. And it helps us to respect better how they serve with us and how life works. Quite a while back, maybe 150 years ago, Chief Seattle said something that was very profound. Said a lot that was very profound. But one thing he said was, we are part of a web of life, and every strand is important. And that what befalls one part will befall the other. And so this is what we don't seem to understand or comprehend, is this web of life that we live in and how interdependent we are. So, there was also an observation made just not very long ago about the body weight of human beings. Some way, way, way back many years when the body weight was just something like 1 point something of the weight of all mammals in the world. And today, the body weight of human beings is 98%. And all of the animals in the world are 2%. You think about that. Think what we've done already. So there's a great imbalance. There's a great imbalance of humanity on this earth, and the natural laws don't abide that. They don't abide. And there's law, and the best thing you can do is keep the balance. So we should be paying real attention to that. And just the quality of life that comes from all the beings that are here they'll be denied our grandchildren. And then when they lose that, then they lose even better perspective of how to survive. So we're destroying their well-being. We're really destroying the efforts that they can put forward if they have the respect and knowledge. I don't know. This style of talking and observation, they tell me, is not realistic in today's times. And I suppose not if you're thinking in terms of Wall Street and you're thinking in terms of power and authority. But in the long run, it is absolutely the law. And as the peacemaker told us a long time ago, it will prevail. And so the earth itself, well, it'll change. It'll cool down. We'll have another ice age. And we're in that process right now. The trigger has been pulled, the action is taken, and it's going on right now. And I've had long discussions with scientists in different parts of the world, and they tell us that's exactly what's going on. The amazing thing is that this country, the United States, refuses to acknowledge that. Just astonishing. And time is an element now. And now we're bringing in another element, time. So how much time? And that's always the question. There was a 3-part series written in the New Yorker. I don't know whether you're aware of it or saw it last spring, written by this woman. Probably, I think, one of the best compilations of fact. Very realistic assessment of what's going on. And in that discussion, in her story, she told about how this present administration went to one of the scientists that knows about all of this here in New York and asked him what was his prognosis. And he said, it's bad. We'll be lucky to be here in 100 years, and maybe sooner. And he said also that people are going to have to adapt to the changes, but the changes are going to come so fast that you won't be able to adapt. So it struck a chord, because I remember at one point when the president was asked about this climate change, which is a softer discussion of global warming. When he was asked about this, he said, well, we're just going to have to adapt. So now I understood that he did know, and he was instructed. And he simply chose to use the words, we will have to adapt. Well, of course we will. I mean, there's no other option. And whether you're capable, he didn't go on any further. So his awareness then is obvious, which makes his culpability more. The world needs good leaders and good leadership. So I think what's happening now is clearly an indication of where we are. It's a international, universal action now taken by these huge systemic changes. The Gulf Stream is slowing down in the Atlantic Ocean, has been slowing down. 1960, the whole of the Atlantic Ocean was pure salt water, and now a convection of ice water, snow, and the melting of the snow and ice has mitigated the salt water, and we now have a convection of fresh water that's reaching all the way to the Carolinas. The result is that the Gulf Stream is slowing down. And a report from the University of Bergen, a university that sits on the coastline of Norway, who monitors the current, gave a report in 2001. And they said more or less, and I don't have the exact words, but more or less they said, Gulf Stream slowing down. And if it continues to slow down at the pace it's doing, it could conceivably stop altogether within the next 15 years. And so here we are now, and that's what's changing. Now we're hearing and seeing in one report after another the acceleration of the ice melt. Well, that's the condition of the Earth. That's where we are. And so how do we meet that challenge? Well, we have to take some instruction. And people, I should give you some hope here in that other nations of the world are very much aware of this and are trying hard. And they look at the United States as completely crazy. They think that this country is just simply not in its right mind in the direction it's taking. And they're looking at us as a whole. But I remember, too, that when in 1992, when we went to the Rio meeting on the issues of environment, a great meeting that was held in Rio, and when President Bush, #1, spoke, he said, and I guess I have to paraphrase again because I do remember it, he said, and I'm trying to remember, he said the American standard of living for the United States is not up for discussion here. That's an amazing statement because everybody that come from around the world, I don't know, the biggest gathering of world leaders ever to meet this problem, and he laid it right out flat. Well, okay, that's everybody's problem, but we're not going to discuss that here. And when you're talking about one of the biggest instigators and problem, and the leader says that, then it doesn't leave you much hope. So I think the American population have to really think about leadership now. Got to change leadership, and you got to get good leadership, and leadership has to be responsive to the welfare of the people, not to the welfare of interests. And those are simple things, but they're very difficult. I think the democratic process in America has been co-opted now by corporations and big money. And it's hard to even reach the ear of your representative for the common person. So the common person feels helpless. But they aren't, if they understand. And in this idea of democracy, which I must say, the Iroquois had a lot to do with, If you read the discussion by Ben Franklin, he'll tell you that he was very, very impressed with this idea of democracy and leadership by agreement and consent, and the ability to set up leaders and remove them.
Sutamon notre teamon, utotraya satiato tayato, imatoya satao notre teamon, utotraya satiaton, satiaton sadom sadom. Sadom, Sadom, una torte Sadom, una paz.